Hello, my name is David Modler, and I'm an artist, scholar, and professor originally from Baltimore, Maryland. I currently live in Rockville. I'm an associate professor of art in the Department of Contemporary Art and Theater at Shepherd University in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. At Shepherd, I coordinate the art education program. I also teach foundations, mostly drawing, design, and printmaking. I also have been working at the Delaplaine for the last 3 years or so, where I've developed several different weekend classes for adults, primarily it's an experimental drawing class, a mixed media painting class, and a visual journal course. I also work with the summer programs where I develop camp experiences with the arts for younger kids, anything from printmaking to making zines and artist trading cards and working in journals. Wide variety of different activities that I work with the little guys with. So what I've been doing here is working on a series of instructional videos for the Delaplaine to provide some content for working with visual journals. So I've done 2 videos so far. The first video dealt with basic watercolor applications, so working with washes, color mixing, color blending, and then I did another video working with I guess I would say experimental watercolor applications, working with salt and working with bubble wrap as a sort of printing matrix that you can use to work with the paint. And then I also showed some examples of using rubbing alcohol. I was unable to demonstrate that technique because you can't find any rubbing alcohol at the store. So if you've got any at your house, you can give that one a try with an eyedropper or a brush. The focus for today's video is going to be on working with watercolor pencils. And so I do a lot of work in my visual journals with watercolor paint, watercolor pencil, markers, pens, anything that's portable. What I tend to do is buy these mesh bags like this and keep all of my supplies in them. This bag can also just go right into my backpack with my journal, so it keeps my practice portable. It also keeps it mobile, so I don't have to be in my studio to do my work. I can do the work I want to do in my visual journal anywhere I am with the basic materials that I carry around. So what I've got my journal. Part of the idea with these videos is that they're developmental. My idea is that they're going to sort of build upon one another. So the things that I've been showing you, I did some work with the salt, that page is right here. Might try and use this space so you can see what the material and the application looks like on white paper, and then what it might look like if you did it on top of something that you already did with either a wash or with one of the other watercolor application experiments. Because the idea is that you can sort of build up layers, and that spaces can build up over time, and that these videos could be seen as a way to sort of get things started and then continue to sort of add additional layers. So what I have out here is I have my watercolor paints, because one of the things we're going to do is do some work with those as well. So I have a brush, a medium bristled brush there. I also have some watercolor pencils. The kind that I like are these Derwent Inktense pencils. Any watercolor pencil will do for working in the visual journal. I like to keep it portable, so a tin of 12 is easy to move around with, and sometimes I just pull out the 3 or 4 colors that I really like and put those in my bag and don't carry the whole tin around at all. So you can make some choices about that. I also have some markers here, so I've just got a yellow marker. This one's got a double tip, so one tip is thinner, the other tip is sort of like a brush tip, but any yellow marker that's water-based will work. And I also pulled out a couple highlighters because these are water-based markers as well and will blend with these materials. So what I want to do is show you a couple basic techniques. Make sure you got a water cup, because you'll need that for what we're going to do, and working with these watercolor pencils. So the thing I like about the watercolor pencils is it's the same kind of material that's in a tray of watercolor paint. It's just in this pencil form. So it doesn't really need a lot of drying time, and you can pull them out, get to work, pack them back up, and be on your way fairly quickly. But if I were to put a pen or a set of these out for someone to work with, whether they were kids or adults, doesn't really matter the age, I think initial uh, our initial idea would be to use them like we might use watercolor, just plain old colored pencils or crayons. We would just use it to sort of embellish and fill in spaces with color. We may not think about some of the diverse processes that can be these materials can be used for. So I want to show you some of those things today. So with this material, one thing that works really well, and these are all techniques, these first few, applying the watercolor pencil to dry paper. So I just sort of put some of that material here, dip my brush in the water, and then I can just blend. Looks like my brush was dirty. I can just blend that watercolor pencil material and get the color to blend right out from that space. With this kind of material, the more material you apply to the surface, the more color you're going to get. So it would work on dry paper and paper that's blank white, but I could also explore adding watercolor pencil on top of an area that I may have explored some other materials as well and added in. The watercolor paint and the watercolor pencil material will freely sort of blend and mix together on that paper. So I can work in either space, whether I'm building up layers on top of things that I've already done with some of the other watercolor paint applications, or whether I'm starting something fresh. So blending with water, one of those basic techniques that you can try experimenting with. Another technique that's a good one to experiment with is working with blending this paint, but not just with water, but maybe thinking about blending it with another color. So another color of watercolor paint. So I put some blue here on the paper, and I'm going to take some of this reddish color and blend it in to the blue to make a different color here. So the watercolor paint will activate the watercolor pencil just like the clean water does. Except now you have the benefit of mixing these two colors together, getting them to blend together on the paper. Couple tips about this is make sure you're picking contrasting colors. If I were to draw blue watercolor pencil onto the paper and then blend it with blue paint, I'm just going to get a whole bunch more blue. So think about what colors you're working with, how those colors might contrast, and how those colors might blend together. And then over on this side, I'm going to add another color, maybe some of this greenish color. And even though there's already some watercolor paint on this paper, I can add the watercolor pencil material. I can grab another color out of my tray, maybe a little bit of the yellow, and I can blend it in with that green. And it's going to blend with the green watercolor pencil and also sort of blend in with the blue paint that's already on the paper. So thinking about the color combinations, how those contrasts might work and blend together are some things to consider when working with the watercolor pencil and blending it with the paint. So there's two very different ways that you can work with it, but pretty easy that you can do. You can also use these markers to do various blending and things with the watercolor pencil. So I'm going to take some watercolor pencil, draw some shapes here on this side, on this blue paper, and then I'll draw one over here so you can see some different ways that these materials are working together. So I'm going to take this yellow marker, and it was a dark brown watercolor pencil. And with this yellow marker, I can start blending the yellow right into the brown. It'll activate it just like the water does, a little bit differently, but same premise as the water or the paint. can activate that watercolor pencil, and then it has this ability to sort of blend in with whatever color was already applied to the paper over on this side. On this side, maybe I'll use this blue one, and I'll blend some of this blue highlighter marker in with the watercolor pencil. So it activates that watercolor pencil, it blends it a bit with the color of the marker. A couple things to keep in mind, you're probably thinking this right now, is it will make these markers dirty. So maybe have a set of markers or highlighters set aside specifically as ones that you want to experiment with these different blending processes. And I'm curious about this pink over here, how this pink might look with the brown and the blue. So I'm going to blend some of that there as well. So just to sort of go back and look at these techniques. So blending with water, you can draw whatever you're working on with the watercolor pencil, and then it can be easily blended with water. I used a medium brush, but any size brush will work for whatever it is that you might be working on. And then think about how it can blend with the watercolor paint, another technique, and then with the markers. And there's two other ways that you can experiment with these watercolor pencils, and they're both based on fairly standard watercolor painting techniques. One is a wet on dry technique. So this paper is dry, and I'm just gonna dip the pencil directly into the water. Hopefully you can see that. Just dip it in the water and then draw with that pencil. And you'll just notice that it draws in a much different fashion when the pencil tip is wet. You might have to dip the pencil several times into the water to keep it wet, but you'll be able to feel the difference. There's a difference of how the watercolor pencil flows on the paper when it's wet versus when it's dry. So make sure that with the techniques using the water, the watercolor paint, and the markers that you're doing that on dry paper with a dry pencil, and that this technique is slightly different. So you're just dipping it in the water and then drawing with it. And then there's also a way that you can do something very similar to this, and I would call it a wet on wet process. The only difference would be that not only is the pencil point wet, but the surface that I'm going to draw into is also wet. So I could just take some water and apply it to an area that I'm working on, or I could paint it a color and then take a watercolor pencil, dip it in the water, and then think about how that color could blend in with those materials. You just notice that when you work with the watercolor pencil wet and you're then drawing into the wet surface, that the watercolor pencil material seems to dissipate, kind of spreads out a bit more because it gets so saturated and it's breaking it down. It's a water soluble material, so it's being dissolved as you're drawing with it. So there's some ideas how it might look on colored paper, on the dry paper. So a couple different techniques there for you to try working with your watercolor pencils. Just blending the watercolor pencil with water, thinking about blending it with different colors of paint. There's another one I blended just with water. Using your markers to activate the watercolor pencil can be another way. And then wet on dry, so the pencil tip is wet, and then I'm painting it onto the paper or drawing it onto the paper. And then another technique is wet on wet, so the paper was wet and the pencil tip was wet. So another way that you can apply that material. I'm going to tilt this up to kind of come to a close here today. Hope you're enjoying this series. Have another video, 2 more videos that I'm planning to do, so look for those. Like I said, this was number 3 in this series. So have fun, stay safe, and I'll see you soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.